Welcome, you're listening to musical poetry. This podcast exists for moments when ordinary language proves insufficient, when analysis explains, arguments persuade, opinions multiply, and yet something essential remains unspoken. In such moments, poetry does not compete with reason, it speaks beneath it, across time, across power. Today's episode brings together three works written across more than 300 years, each responding from its own historical moment to the same enduring human question. What happens when power loses patience with restraint? The earliest historical hinge of this episode begins at the turn of the 19th century. When Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Egypt in 1798, he did so not only as a general, but as a self-conscious heir to ancient empire. He brought with him scholars, engineers, artists, and scientists, the savants, who carefully measured, mapped, and documented the monuments of pharaonic power. Among them stood the great Sphinx, buried for centuries in desert sand. Napoleon's army did not fully excavate the Sphinx, but it reintroduced it to Europe's imagination. Through drawings, engravings, and the monumental Description de l'Égypte, Europeans once again saw a colossal symbol of divine kingship, ancient, impassive, half-buried yet enduring. Napoleon himself would soon fall. By 1815, the modern emperor who had modelled himself on ancient rulers was defeated and exiled, his ambitions reduced to history. Only a year later, in 1816 to 1817, the Sphinx was physically uncovered further, as large quantities of sand were cleared away and its massive form emerged once again into view. It is in this exact historical moment between the fall of a modern king of kings and the literal unearthing of ancient imperial stone that Ozymandias was written. Percy Bysshe Shelley was 25 years old when he wrote the poem in 1818. He did not need to explain the image of a ruined ruler in the desert to his contemporaries. They were already surrounded by it. Shelley shows us power after time has passed judgment, a ruler who believed his works eternal, now reduced to fragments, his certainty preserved only as irony, his authority erased by sand. More than a century later, another poet would look at the same symbolic landscape and see not ruin, but awakening. The Second Coming was written by W.B. Yeats in 1919 when he was 54 years old. In the aftermath of the First World War, empires had collapsed, democratic institutions were fragile, and confidence in progress was shaken. Yeats does something extraordinary. He takes the ancient figure, half lion, half man, desert-born, pitiless, and sets it in motion. Where Shelley's imperial form lies broken and mute, Yeats' Sphinx walks. It is no longer a monument to the past, it is a force returning to history. Between these two moments stands Shakespeare. Written in 1608, when Shakespeare was about 44 years old, Coriolanus gives us the missing human link. Not a ruin, not a monster, but a temperament. A leader admired for strength, yet impatient with accountability, convinced that restraint is weakness and that authority should not have to justify itself. These three works are not combined here to be modernized or explained away. They are brought together because they already form a cycle. Shelley shows us imperial power as ruin. Shakespeare shows us imperial power as human certainty. Yeats shows us imperial power as myth returning to life. What you are about to hear is a musical setting built entirely from their words, not an adaptation. A conversation across centuries and across the long memory of power. I will step aside now and let the poetry speak.
Turning and turning in the widening gyre. The falcon cannot hear the falconer.
Things fall apart, the center cannot hold.
Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world.
The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned.
The best lack total conviction, while the worst are steeped in passionate intensity.
My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my words, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains.
I banish you. There is a world elsewhere.
Measure my worth by deeds, not by your voices. I know what must be done. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my words, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Things fall apart.
Nothing beside remains.
The center cannot hold.
I will not flatter the people.
Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains.
And what rough beast? Its hour come round at last, trudges towards Bethlehem to be born.
What you've just heard is not a prediction, and it is not an accusation. It is a pattern observed at different moments in history. Shelley wrote from the aftermath, looking at the fallen modern emperor through the lens of ancient ruin. Yeats wrote from the threshold, watching order weaken and something older, harder, begin to stir. Shakespeare wrote from the human center, where power is still flesh and voice, still able to choose restraint, still capable of believing that necessity excuses everything. Together they remind us of something unsettling. Power does not become myth when it is strong. It becomes myth when it stops listening. The figure that moves through this episode is not only stone and not only monster. It is what power becomes when it forgets its limits and outlives its justifications. Poetry cannot prevent this cycle, but it can make it visible. And sometimes, seeing clearly is the last form of responsibility we have. Thank you for listening to Musical Poetry. If this episode stayed with you, you're welcome to comment, share, or subscribe, not to amplify an opinion, but to keep these long conversations with history alive. Until next time, where words fail, poetry still speaks.